Hello chess fans, today I wanted to cover a game I played around 2 years ago, and at this point I was rated 1930 and my opponent was rated around 1700, and I played against a fantasy caro-kann, which is not a very popular variation, but I think I managed to deal with it well in the game. So my opponent started with e4, I went for c6, d4, d5, and it's important to mention that I'm not natively a caro-kann player, and even at this point I didn't really have a opening repertoire. And so I just played the caro-kann because I thought it would be fun, and I did a little bit of preparation against my opponent, who I knew played a little bit suspect variation, which I thought would be the fantasy variation, and I thought this would be a good variation to target from my opponent's repertoire. So here I played what used to be a pretty much never played move, but it's now incredibly trendy and the highest winning move as black, which is queen b6. And this is what I recommend for anyone who's looking for a weapon against the fantasy variation, because I feel it's very tricky because the regular plan of knight c3, bishop f4, queen d2 no longer works because of queen takes b2. And you also get an improved version of some e5 lines, if you know those lines. So my opponent went knight c3, and I think a better move nowadays is a4, because after this move, I think that white has a pretty pleasant position, an advanced French, sort of, but not many people know this, and this has incredible win rates for black anyways. So my opponent went knight c3, and so here, I mean, you pretty much have to play d takes e4, and here my opponent has three moves. Now I think what is the best move, but not a lot of players are going to play, is bishop c4. This transposes it into a black Mardimer gambit, where queen b6 simply, it just doesn't make any sense, and after something like takes here, knight takes e6, the engine says this position is equal. Now 9 times out of 10 I'm taking white here, but instead of taking the pawn, the engine says this is the best move, but I don't think it really is. I think a simpler move is either e5 or knight f6, and both of these would be pretty good for black. So instead, if your opponent plays here, you can go for e5, and you essentially have an improved version of the e5 line because white couldn't commit to knight c3. For example, if we look at d takes here, and e5, this was considered to be the main line, but after knight f3, bishop g4, our opponent in this position would have bishop c4 and eventual c3. But after we play queen b6 is essentially a waiting move to bait out knight c3, so that in this position they no longer have c3, and here the main line goes with bishop c5, knight a4, here to here, and this position is considered to be equal at best for white. So instead, my opponent played knight takes e4, which is the main line and considered to be the best move. Second, well, in my opinion, I think bishop c4 would be better, but this is considered to be the best move, and here you should go with bishop f5. Now, another move you could play is knight f6, and after takes, you enter into some sort of, I think this is called a Taras variation of the caro-kann, and it's sort of double-edged. White has played f3, which is a bad move, but generally these structures aren't for everyone, so I didn't play that. I went for bishop f5. My opponent went b3 here. So now here, the only move I was familiar with, this was still in my prep, was c3. And yeah, pretty much this was the last move of my prep. I had no idea what to do from here because there was just so many branches of variations, and I didn't know the caro-kann that well, so I had to be prepared for a lot of other stuff as well. So my opponent played b3 here. I went knight d7, and I was preparing knight f6. Again, I could have gone knight f6 right away, but I didn't want double pawns, so my opponent went bishop e2. I went knight gf6. My opponent went bishop d3, and here you have to be wary of the tactic, which is takes, and then takes here, but thankfully we have a counter tactic with queen a5 to pick up the bishop. So my opponent I went e6, and here my opponent probably thought that that was working after knight takes, bishop f5 here, but here I have the nice move queen a5 to not double my pawns. So queen d2, queen x e5. So now let's just take stock for a minute and basically just look at the position. So here it can be concluded that black is just significantly better. Why? Because white has this terrible pawn on f3. If the pawn was on f2 and white played knight f3 here, the position is probably equal. And so white has this bad pawn, and they also have this bad bishop. This bishop is never going to be in front of this pawn because this pawn is pretty much blockaded very well. Second of all, black has more flexibility. Black can both attack on the queen side and the king side, and they can castle on both sides, while white is pretty much limited to attacking on this side, considering where their bishop is pointed, and this sort of expansion is what's going to happen in the game, but it's going to be very slow. So here my opponent played knight e2. I played bishop e7, just developing. Knight g3. I played queen g6. Again, it could have been considerable to go with queen d5, but I was afraid of c4. Queen g6, c4, and here I played h5, which is a very standard move nowadays, but at the time I thought this was just a very creative idea because I wanted to play h4, and I eventually wanted to try to kick away this knight. So here my opponent played a very bad move, which I'm not entirely sure I very much understand. I think my opponent wanted to allow their knight to come here, but I'm confused what the problem with castling was, because after h4, knight e2, there doesn't really seem to be many problems here for white, considering h3 is coming next, and if I go h3 myself, g3, and the attack is gone here for black. So I think castling would have been better. In this position, I think I would have kept flexible with my pawns and probably either gone for castle's queen side or castle's king side. Here you can be flexible. So my opponent went queen e2, preparing knight e4, and so I went bishop e4, which I think is what my opponent missed. And here they have no way to block the check, and so my opponent decides to go for king f2, uncastling their king, basically not allowing their king to castle. So here I decide to castle queenside, seeing my opponent's king is pretty weak. Even though my king, yes, it has some air around it, I thought this would be fine. So here my opponent goes knight e4. And take a minute to see if you can find a pretty good move for black here. Notice that black is up on development and white's king is very weak, so those should lead you to two things, basically. If you've watched my previous videos, it should lead you to believe that we need to break in the center. So how would we break in the center here? Simple option is e5. And in this position, I think that black is doing very well, but I managed to mess this up severely. So my opponent played knight takes f6. And here, I just wanted to point out that there is an absolutely ridiculous engine move here that I don't think either me or my opponent even considered for a single second. And I just will give you some time to think about it. Now, in light of how I recently play, I like to play sacking and attacking. I think I might have played this move. It's possible, but I think it's like at least at most 5% chance because the move is just completely unnatural. The move is absolutely ridiculous. E takes d4. I think for most chess players, if you see a capture, you just instinctively just capture back. But sometimes the strongest moves and the most dirty engine moves are when you don't capture back and you play some random other move that apparently wins. So I'm just going to go into the engine line. Obviously, white needs to save their knight, so they go back. We attack their knight again. And here, there's pretty much nowhere for the knight to go. For example, let me just turn the engine on. If the knight goes here, the problem is that, yeah, you're just getting slaughtered with two rooks. And after this is a threat. And yeah, white can't really defend here. Another sample line is this. Takes, and this position would be over because you'd lose the queen. So yeah, white apparently can't retreat their knight, so what white would have to do, the only line here for white, is to play a3. And here we would take this, and after they take our bishop, we would go e3, king f1, and rook h8, and this position is supposed to be -6. Now, would I ever even seen any of this in the game, and does this position look -6 right now? Yes, if I look at this position, it looks -6. But to give up a knight like that for absolutely seeing like zero compensation from here, I'm supposed to see, oh, my pawn goes from f4 all the way here. It is pretty much impossible to see, and if you even consider it, it is very hard to see as well. So instead, I think I played the natural g takes f6, defending my pawn. Obviously, the whole idea of e5, if you didn't understand, was that after this, I would have this fork on the file. So after g takes, if they take here, again, I have this. And, well, here I'm just winning the queen, but yeah, so they could never take, so I went here. My opponent went a3, trying to get rid of that. Bishop here, b4, bishop b6, c4, c5. Yeah, in all these moves, I think that the idea was to provoke my opponent to come forward. For example, here, maybe I should have gone bishop c7. But, yeah, because that would just transpose to the game, except without c5, which I think was a fairly useful move. Okay, so my opponent made bishop b6, this happened, and yeah, here I made my big blunder of the game, and you've seen it already. So now the easiest way to win this game, I think, is with this. After rook g8, the position is just completely lost, because if their rook goes to g1, this king is just stuck on f2. It's not going to get to the corner like it did in the game. And yeah, after this, I can go here, and notice they can never take here because I have this. And I had the right idea that this rook goes here, this rook goes here, but I had the wrong move order. So I played this here, rook here first, which was a very bad move, and pretty much blunders away all my advantage. So here my opponent goes here, which is another mistake. Again, after this, in this position, I would think I would be completely winning again after king g1. I think the engine gives that this f5, f4 sort of is winning for black. But instead, after this, yeah, so that would also blunder. Instead, my opponent should have gone for queen e4, trading queens. And yeah, that's pretty hard to see though. So my opponent went here, I went here, I went for h4, g4, I took here. And yeah, this position is completely winning after queen e6, rook a d1. The only thing you have to do here is not allow white to consolidate, and that's exactly what I did. So here the only move to keep the advantage is h3, and the idea is you don't want to allow white to get h3. And don't worry about losing the pawn. This pawn it doesn't matter considering how many pieces are on the board, and if they open that up, they're going to die on the h file. But instead, my opponent went here, and I was very mad at myself in the game. I can remember I was visibly frustrated. I was against a lower rated player. I was winning the entire game. I knew I was winning. And then my opponent has seemingly, in my eyes, this position was equal because I didn't see h3. But, yeah, so I spent around 15 minutes here or something like that. And I played f6, which I was very disappointed in because it's simply, after h3, the position is equal. So here, yeah, when you're frustrated at a position, it's really hard to like keep your composure. And so I believe that like I had a huge advantage from the opening, like excellent opening prep, like the fantasy caro-kann was pretty much destroyed. And yeah, here I started doing nothing. I played rook g7, and the idea was, I don't really know what the idea was. Rook g7 is just a waiting move. The engine says that I can probably play rook e f8, look for f5, and then I could be better still. But yeah, the engine gives the advantage of plus 0.2, or sorry, minus 0.2 for black here, so it's hard to believe that that's much better at all. So instead I played rook g7, my opponent went f4, and here f4 gives white some chances. So in this position, after queen b3, white is equal. But neither me or my opponent thought that, because we thought this was just a fork. Me and my opponent both thought that white was just completely winning here. But here white has like pretty much a ridiculous combination to not lose the game. So see if you can find what white can do here to not lose the game. It is very stunning, and all the pieces are perfectly placed to not lose. So keep in mind, if white moves this bishop, they lose the game on the spot to queen g3. That's just obviously clearly losing. So the best move here, and the only move that saves white, is queen d3. Very ridiculous, just protecting this threat, and after queen takes b2, rook d2 would trap the queen, which is, well, neither me or my opponent saw that, and it might seem pretty easy to see, but it's very hard in a game to, like, when I've told you that there's a tactic here, it's pretty easy to see it, queen d3 and then rook d2 defending it. But during the game, obviously neither me or my opponent saw that, so my opponent started off with queen f5 check, which is still not losing because you can go here, just slightly worse because of king b8 king is slightly better placed on b8. And so yeah, here my opponent didn't see the move, and they went queen takes f6, and here it was just mop up from here. I'm just up a full piece after rook f7, attacking the queen, defended by this queen. My opponent doesn't even have rook d8 because the bishop covers that, and after bishop takes h4, yeah, here I was very thankful. And yeah, just a little bit of tactics there. I played e4 to open up my bishop, threatening check to win the queen. Well, not threatening this check because I would lose the game, but threatening here to give this check, so my opponent goes here. And then I played rook f1, which led to mate with the queen coming down. So yeah, this was a game in which I managed to get a huge advantage from the opening. As you can see here, I was just completely winning. My opening went spectacular for me, like -5 here with this move, but unfortunately I threw away all the advantage, and then I got angry at myself and started playing worse and worse moves, which is like, you saw this f6, you saw rook g7, pretty much doing nothing, not seeing h3. I was getting very mad at myself in the game. And then finally, my opponent just blunders the game away with this, because they didn't see the only tactic that could keep them in the game. So that was the end of today's video, guys. If you like this video, please remember to leave a like and subscribe, and let me know what type of video you would like to see in the comments section down below.